Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. This is a very interactive session, so we want to make sure that we have enough time to do the small group activity and the whole group discussion at the end. So if people could just please quietly find a seat, we are going to kick it off. So again, good afternoon, and thank you so much for coming to our session on stigma and mental health. We have a great panel lined up for you, and again, this is a very interactive session, so we're also looking for all of your ideas and suggestions as well. So before we get started, I'd like to introduce myself and my colleague. I'm Linda Krisawati, and I'm the Senior Program Manager for Evidence-Based Practice at AMCHP.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nadia Lunian, and I'm a Program Analyst at AMCHP on the Women's and Infant Health team.
Sorry, technology. I thought I'd closed out of everything, so I apologize for that. So I know this is a little bit of an awkward setup because I am essentially chained to the podium, but I also have a clicker, so we're going to try and do this as well as I can. We wanted to start this off by just asking if anyone in the audience is comfortable or willing to share how you would define stigma. Anyone who is comfortable sharing how you would define stigma? If you are, feel free to raise your hand, and we do have a microphone we can run over. Is anyone willing to define it? Okay, well, if not, then you have definitely come to the right session because we're actually going to talk about that for our next slide. So, with that being said, I did want to just acknowledge that our colleagues at Nami San Antonio chapter were very gracious in letting us borrow their slide deck on stigma. So this is actually the definition that NAMI uses, and I would love to underscore the term devalue. I think that's a really critical piece of stigma, in that we are in some way placing an inherently negative value on someone because of something that they are experiencing. And within the context of our session today, we're talking about mental health, right? So how someone who's experiencing a mental illness experiences stigma, and we're essentially passing judgment on their character in a way, right? We're devaluing them. So there's quite a bit of literature looking at stigma and mental health, although there is no kind of consensus on how many types of stigma someone can experience. But it is upwards of 5, at least, that I could find just in looking at all the studies that have been published, looking at the literature on stigma. But really, we can look at upwards of those 5 types of stigma and condense them or collapse them into 2 main types. So we're really looking at public or social stigma. Underneath this would also be institutional stigma, if anyone has heard of that as well. And this is really stigma that is coming from society, from the structures we have in place, from the value that we place on people who are experiencing a mental illness or lack thereof, right? The value that we're not placing on them. But it in some way is society or people that someone with a mental illness is interacting with who are have prejudiced attitudes towards them or discrimination in a certain way. And institutional stigma as well, like I said, falls into this category. And that's a really interesting one that we don't necessarily talk about, but that's looking at the structures that we have that are kind of biased against people who might be experiencing a mental illness. So looking at the lack of parity between how mental health services are reimbursed versus like physical health services, right? There's not parity there. And then also looking at even research, mental health research. There's not as much funding that is put towards looking at mental health conditions versus looking at physical health ailments. So just something to keep in the back of your mind that we'll be talking about in a little more detail. The other piece of this is perceived or self-stigma. That's the other kind of bucket that those other types of stigma tend to fall into. So with perceived or self-stigma, this is where a person experiencing a mental illness has internalized all of that negative external stigma that has been directed towards them, and it actually they start to believe that their own value and their self-worth, right, is depreciated essentially. So this can lead to a loss of self-efficacy and also lowered self-esteem, right? It's incredibly harmful, but it's in some way that the person experiencing this has actually internalized it and believes this to be true. So just coming back to the slide and highlighting that regardless of the type of stigma that we're talking about, these are all forms of discrimination, right? And I think in particular, the World Health Organization also states that this type of discrimination that someone experiences because of their experiences with mental health illness is actually a human rights violation. Right? This is incredibly damaging to someone, and I think just kind of speaks to the urgency or importance of us addressing stigma within the context of mental health. So I think a lot of you are in the room because you care about this topic or you're interested in learning more, and I think are probably pretty familiar with the implications or ramifications of someone experiencing stigma, right? And the effects that it can have physically, mentally, emotionally. It's a lot, right? It's incredibly burdensome. And I think the one thing to really underscore on this slide in particular, it's not really specifically stated, it's kind of implied though, that this is actually one of the biggest barriers to someone accessing services, that even if someone has access to the services, they may not go because of this fear of stigma, or that they actually feel that they are being stigmatized, or that judgment is being passed on them. So again, this is a major contributing factor to unmet mental health need, not necessarily access, but that they cannot access for that fear. So looking at stigma at the national level, again, within the context of mental health, it's really difficult to measure and it's really difficult to quantify. Again, World Health Organization refers to mental health stigma as like a hidden burden, right? It's a huge burden on our population, but it's not something that people feel comfortable talking about because we don't necessarily give them a safe space to do so, right? Or make it normalized in a way that we can talk about this and what people are living with and what they're experiencing. So these are just a few statistics up here kind of looking at unmet mental health need, because again, we know that stigma is a huge contributing factor to that unmet mental health need. So there are several studies, several assessments that have been done trying to measure stigma, but again, it's really difficult when people don't feel comfortable reporting that this is happening to them. So I think it just kind of speaks again to the importance of us normalizing conversations around stigma, around mental health, mental illness, and making people feel safe and supported to have these conversations so we can more accurately quantify what is going on and what people are living with. It's not up here, but I think just to also point out, especially with children who may be experiencing a mental illness, it's really interesting with parents in that parents may also contribute to some of the stigma as well, because they're very concerned that if their child is given a diagnosis, that they will be treated differently. And a lot of times they are, right? They're treated differently in school. They may be treated differently by their peers, by their teachers. And parents also, the literature has shown that they are very concerned that in some way their parenting is a cause of their child being diagnosed, that their child has a mental illness because they did something wrong. And again, it's not on the slide, but I think just when we're talking about mental health in general, I'll get to this in a minute, but it's very different than when we talk about a physical health condition. Very, very different, because we have so much kind of wrapped up in that somehow it's connected to someone's morals or their way of life or something, that they did something wrong, right? And that's why they developed a mental illness, right? It's just there's a lot wrapped up in it that we don't talk about when someone gets the flu or pneumonia, right? We don't talk about it the same way. So again, it's very difficult to measure because people are not comfortable talking about it, but we know it's a huge issue. It's just an unspoken issue. So I just wanted to thank my colleague over here from Colorado who actually shared some of her data from a survey that was done a little while ago looking at their MCH population and looking at stigma. And I think just looking at these numbers here, again, really highlights the fact that people are not comfortable even talking to their providers who they may have an established relationship with about these issues. So again, even if they have access to someone who could provide support, they're not comfortable bringing this up, and it really speaks to the importance of again, normalizing these conversations. So I'm going to speed it up a little bit, sorry, because I'm taking too long, and we have a great panel who's going to talk about this in more detail. So I'm going to switch and talk a little bit about some of the things we can do to address stigma. So first and foremost, we can have meetings like this. We can have this conversation. I think, again, normalizing mental health and increasing mental health literacy. We talk about other things in like high school and health class, but we don't always address mental health. We talk about stress, but that's about as far as we push it, right? We really need to make sure that everyone has a basic understanding that this is something that can happen to them, right? We know that 1 in 5 Americans every year, right, within that context, are experiencing a mental illness at any given time. So that means some of us in the room have had these experiences or will have these experiences, or someone that's very close to us, right, is going to have these experiences or has had these experiences. So it's very relevant to all of us, whether it's in our work life or in our personal life, that we need to have these conversations. I think one of the biggest things we can do is to really focus on parity between mental health and physical health, right? Looking at ways to integrate mental health, behavioral health into physical health, or into primary health care rather. In particular, World Health Organization, again, I think they have a lot of really great literature kind of emphasizing the importance of this. And they've specifically said that you cannot have health without mental health. Right? We're not just talking about physical health, we are talking about overall body health, or overall health, and that includes mental health, right? You can't have one without the other. So again, I think it's placing that importance and that value on mental health, that it is just as important as physical health. So I apologize, I'm hoping you're gonna look this up in your app later because the slide is a little small, but this is a cartoon that I found that I think is really poignant, because essentially it shows different physical health conditions that we might have or that we've all had at some point probably, but it uses the words or terms that we use when someone's experiencing a mental illness. So I'm gonna squint and read this to you. So there's one where someone is clearly feeling nauseous and not feeling well, and the person says, have you tried, not having the flu, right? Substitute that for mental health. That's what we say. Can you just try not feeling so depressed all the time? These are things that we say, right? There's someone who's bleeding profusely, and it says, it's like you're not even trying. Would we ever say that to someone who was bleeding? Probably not. I think this one is particularly poignant. It's someone who is missing a limb, and it says, you just need to change your frame of mind, then you'll feel better. But just based on the reactions that I'm getting, right? So definitely take a look at this cartoon. You'll see other versions of it online. But again, it speaks to the fact that we inherently devalue mental health because of the way we talk about it, as though someone could just change their frame of mind or change something and magically they're going to get better. We don't say that when someone has the flu, right? We try to get them medication, we give them support, we give them rest, we try to get them the help they need, right? Or someone who's missing a limb or bleeding profusely, right? We try to get them immediate services or get them access to services, but we just don't necessarily do the same thing with mental health. So I think, again, this kind of speaks to the importance of making sure that we're conscious of our language. In particular, this is a resource that I have added at the back of the slide deck. So in the presentation, you can get access to this. But SAMHSA put together kind of a list of tips within the context of substance use disorder and stigma, but we certainly know that with comorbidities and then also the stigma that's experienced by individuals with substance use disorder is very similar to people experiencing mental illness. And I think the one thing to really highlight here is to make sure that when we're putting together materials or we're putting together projects, that people with lived experience, just like we try to emphasize in MCH in general, that they are front and center and that they are providing input and that these resources are being filtered through their lens, right? We do not want to further stigmatize because we don't have those experiences represented. And just one last thing to kind of leave you with. I mean, I think it's incredibly critical that we hold ourselves accountable. So I think, we're all here, we all really value this, but I think we need to kind of turn that lens inward and really think about the projects that we are implementing, the policies that we're supporting, and even the words that we're using. Even in our personal life, we know that we use, certain words and terms kind of casually, right, that could continue to further stigmatize. So we just need to be very mindful, and I think we have a real opportunity to kind of dismantle these structures that contribute to stigma. And so with that, I'm going to have my colleague Nadia come back up here and introduce our panelists. We're going to talk a little bit more about the work that their organizations have around stigma going on, and then we'll give you the opportunity to talk in your groups and to share back with us. So thank you.
So our first panelist we'll be hearing from is Melissa Riley. Melissa Riley, MA, is the Education Program Coordinator for the National Alliance of Mental Health, or NAMI, San Antonio. Melissa is the program coordinator, and she oversees community mental health education and shares her experience with bipolar in order to reduce the stigma of mental health. She is passionate about working in the field of mental health. So Melissa will be providing us with an overview of NAMI and their approach to addressing mental health stigma.
Hi everyone, I'm so happy to see such a great turnout. That means that there's an interest in mental health, and that's what we want to see. Raise your hand if you've heard of NAMI. Oh wow, that is so great. We do not want to be the best kept secret, please. We're the National Alliance on Mental Illness. We are the largest grassroots mental health organization in the United States. And we have affiliates all over the nation, and anyone can get an affiliate started. So think about that. If you come from an area that doesn't have any mental health resources, you yourself can actually be the boots on the ground and say, hey, I want to start an affiliate here. So I work with the Nami San Antonio affiliate, and basically what we do is education. We educate people. We do advocacy. We talk and talk and talk. And I only have 7 minutes, so I'm going to try not to talk too much. But we talk about mental health because things grow in silence. If you don't talk about it, then it becomes what I call a monster, and it becomes scary. But if you talk about it, people start to say, hey, this isn't as scary as I thought it was. This isn't as bad as I thought it was. I live with bipolar. I speak 2 languages. I have 2 degrees. I worked for the Department of Health and Human Services for 10 years, for the state of North Carolina for 16 years. Guess what? I'm not so scary. People with mental illness are very functional as long as they get treatment. So whenever there's stigma, it keeps them from getting treatment. So at NAMI, we want to educate. We have 3 principal classes. We have family to family, peer to peer, and basics. Family to family, and all of our services are free. So we beg for money. So you guys don't have to pay for anything, which is really good because we can reach out into all of the community. Family to family is for family members of a loved one that has a mental illness. We educate them about mental illness, about medications. What is mental illness? How does medication work? Because a lot of people don't understand how medication works and how it interacts with one another. They don't understand the side effects and why their loved one doesn't want to take the medication. I always say, think about taking an antibiotic and it makes you nauseous. What does everybody want to do? They don't want to finish it. That's the same thing with mental illness. We also give them insight into how their loved one perceives the world, and that's called empathy. The biggest thing you can do with any kind of illness is have empathy. So like we were talking about earlier, if somebody's bleeding or they're upset or they have the flu, if you don't have empathy, you do just say, get over it. No, you have empathy. You bring them soup. You help comfort them. You talk to them. You do the best you can. You can't fix them, but you have empathy. I always say that people who have a family member with a mental illness and they don't have the mental illness, and the person with the mental illness speak different languages. They really do. And you have to try to understand their language. So in family to family, they learn the language of their loved one with a mental illness. In peer-to-peer, we go over in family to family self-care. Because when you have a family member with mental illness, sometimes you can get so caught up in their illness that you forget to take care of yourself. It kind of comes this codependent type thing. In peer-to-peer, we work with the person with the diagnoses. And peer-to-peer, you have to be really, really brave to take that class. If you have a diagnosis, I don't think people understand how difficult it is with somebody with a diagnosis, be it bipolar, schizophrenia, schizoaffective, depression, anxiety, to stand in front of a group and say, I have this, and to face it. It's really difficult for them, but we go over mental illness, help them understand mental illness, help them understand the medication, help them to manage their triggers. Every single one of us has a trigger. You got to take a test, it's a trigger for your stress. Your dog dies, it's a trigger for your depression. And that's typically situational depression, situational anxiety, and it gets better within a couple of weeks. People with chronic mental illness have to manage their triggers for a lifetime. And a big trigger can be not eating right, not getting enough sleep, being in bad relationships, being in a bad job. So we teach them how to manage their triggers. A lot of times people with mental illness too need help setting goals. I know I have bipolar. Whenever I'm manic, I think I can do anything. right? So we try to help people set a goal, say, okay, you're not going to be president, let's set a smaller goal, or, you're not going to drive a taxi if you don't have your license yet, so let's try to work on getting your license. We break those goals down into manageable things and build their confidence. And we work on having a better support system, how to reach out to have better resources. And so we also give them the perspective of their family members, because a lot of people with mental illness don't understand how they're affecting the people around them. We also offer basics for parents of children with mental illness. A lot of parents have no idea, what's the difference between normal adolescent behavior and mental illness? Why is my child being oppositional? Why are they not coming out of the room? Why are they yelling at me? Why are they so irritable? And, a lot of times we get referrals from CPS, because it gets to the point where the parent really can treat their child badly because of their behavior. And once they're diagnosed, they can take the basics class and really understand what their child is going through. We also do advocacy. We just got back from Austin. We talked to our representatives and talked to them about passing House bills and Senate bills that support mental health. We also go out into the community and give presentations like this and talk to people about our services. We also do support groups. It's called Nami Connections. And the great thing about all of NAMI's services is that we are so grassroots. We go anywhere into the community and different community centers, churches. We try to go to the northwest side, every single side of San Antonio, to reach the entire population. We go into schools and talk about mental illness. And we rely on our volunteers. So look up your local NAMI affiliate if you want to volunteer with them. All of our teachers are volunteers. They're individuals who have been through the classes and they've been trained to teach the classes. So we are grassroots. We rely on you to spread the word about us. So now that you've learned about NAMI and who we are, please spread the word about us. You can refer families to us. So if you come across patients or individuals that are suffering from mental illness, they have a family member that suffers from mental illness, say, hey, here's the number to the local NAMI affiliate. Give them a call. They can refer you to a class and give you support. So thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you, Melissa. All right, so our second speaker is Lisa Maines. Lisa graduated from the University of New Hampshire in 1987 with a BS in business. In 2012, she earned her master's degree from the University of Vermont in education leadership. Lisa is the first Family Fellow graduate from the Vermont LEND program. Lisa has many years of experience with various boards and committees in Vermont. She served 2 years on the Vermont Developmental Disabilities Council, 1 year as president. She continues to offer their Consumer and Family Voice as a member of the Medicaid Exchange Advisory Board, of which she has been a member for over 10 years. Lisa's past employment includes the University of Vermont Center on Disability and Community and Inclusion. She is a former chair of AMCHP's Family and Youth Leadership Committee. Lisa is a parent of 2 children, Megan, age 26, and Patrick, age 21. Megan battled depression and anxiety and subsequent opioid addiction that she bravely rallied back from and has been clean for over 6 years. Patrick was born with a rare genetic condition which involves global developmental delays and a complex array of medical needs. Lisa?
It's really weird to sit there when they're reading your little announcement bio thing. I am a parent, and I also work at Vermont Family Network. So like a lot of people that are here, I kind of have 2 different hats, and I go back and forth between those hats pretty naturally, and it happens a lot. So I work at Vermont Family Network, and so who we are, every state has an organization that does at least some of what we do. We are the one stop in Vermont, so we're the Family Voices, Family to Family Health Information Center, Parent to Parent, PTI, all of those things. We've been doing it for over 30 years. We are statewide. We have about 43 staff members, and our budget is usually somewhere around $2 million, just to give you a sense of who we are. We have 3 programs, and the program that I'm going to be talking about mostly is the Family Support Program, which the other programs, one of them is Direct Service for Early Intervention, and the other one is Puppets in Education, which is really fun. So yeah, we just help families navigate the system. We help them learn to be a better advocate. We have a leadership training program, and really we kind of just, we talk to them. You know, what do they want to talk to, what do they want to, we help them however, when they call, they decide what the conversation's going to go like, really. Through the parent-to-parent, we connect them with each other. That's one of the ways that we can really expand our capacity by really, you know, what happens is they connect to each other and they stay friends for a lifetime. That's happened to me when my son was just a baby, and I'm still calling those people going, hey, you know what happened today? And, you know, we're helping each other work through things. So I'm also going to share a little bit of the personal side, which might be more interesting. It's interesting to me right now that my workshops at AMCHP are kind of blending together. Yesterday I was at a workshop on life course, and right now I'm standing here thinking, okay, I was going to stand here and talk about my kids, but I also think it's important to tell you that I grew up as a person who had a severely depressed mother who was also an alcoholic. So I kind of grew up with, and we didn't talk about it, you know, it just wasn't something. And as an adult, sometimes I meet people that I knew that I was friends with as a child, and, you know, they'll say things like, yeah, we always knew there was something going on, you know, and it's just, it's so interesting to look back on it now. So, and then I became a mom, so I have two kids. Patrick is my son, he's 21, and he has a genetic disability. So he's served in special ed, he has the, you know, passed all the gateways to have an IEP and all of that. Megan is 26 and also was in special education for depression, anxiety, oppositional defiant disorder. So she received some services. She also was bullied. She went through, you know, people doubting her, but this is my granddaughter too, and she's absolutely adorable. One of the things that happened, even though they both were on IEPs, they both received similar services, they both even at one point had the same case manager, and nobody ever questioned anything with Patrick. You know, Patrick had a genetic diagnosis. He was clearly globally delayed. He clearly had things. With Megan, we were questioned every time we turned around. You know, it was the school, it was my family, the experience was so completely different that it really blew me away. And I couldn't figure out why everybody was questioning me. We had a diagnosis from the doctor. You know, it was oppositional defiant disorder and depression. Why did I have to explain that so many times? There were words used such as she's manipulating, she's faking it, she's attention seeking. You know, all of those things came out, and it was incredibly difficult. I didn't really know how to respond to that. Especially since I had been through similar process with my son and not had to do that. So it was very confusing. And it came also from family members who, the same way, didn't question Patrick. There was a lot of support. There was a lot of, you know, wanted to talk about it, wanted to help. But with Megan, it was more, you need to give her some tough love. That's something I heard a lot. So eventually she did get the support she needed in school, and because of some bullying, she ended up finishing school. She actually was afraid to go into the school and finished her senior year with a one-on-one tutor. She did really well her senior year. She had lots of supports. But what happened was she finished school, and it all fell out from under her. And I don't think I saw this coming, but she spiraled downward pretty quickly, and eventually got into the world of drugs and became an addict, and it got really ugly for a lot of years. And to this day, I have trouble not being a little, I feel a little resentment, you know, that the school didn't prepare all of us better. it was like we were gone and they didn't have to worry about us anymore. So it got really hard. And ultimately she got pregnant, which I never would have hoped for. But for her, it was the life-changing moment. And it wasn't about her anymore, and she straightened out her act, and she now has 2 children, and she's doing really well. And I could not possibly be more proud of her, because that's a battle that I don't know how she got herself out of. So when I think about what was helpful as we went through this, one of the things that helped a lot was when people thought outside the box. There's not just a fixed number of answers to the problems. For example, when she finished out her senior year with the one-on-one tutor, that helped her. It helped her get through school and to be happy for that year. And it wasn't something that they really had done before. It also helps when medical professionals backed up things for both of my children, actually. I'd like to think that if I say something, it has the power to, to reach people, but oftentimes I really needed that medical degree to back me up with a letter or a phone call or something like that. We had doctors attend IEP meetings before, so we had psychologists send in letters explaining things, and it was quite funny how the school didn't question things when they saw that. Really not funny. And then it also helped, just generally, I think you were saying this, that just to educate people. Awareness is like the biggest thing, and it's a really big cultural shift, literally. And I think the more we can do that, the better. In Vermont, we're working on a curriculum that will be used in schools, and we're adding components about mental health and cultural diversity right now. So however you can get it out there and get people realizing what mental health challenges are all about, the better. So what could have been done differently? Transparency, prevention, really it's that comorbidity thing that I saw with my daughter, I saw with my mother. I think the more we can talk about those things and realize that I wish someone would have thought ahead with my daughter and said, oh, she's depressed, she's going to be vulnerable to these kinds of things, which is exactly what ended up happening. But maybe if we talked about it ahead of time, maybe that would have helped. I think school and community cultures need to be changed. I think that's a long-term process, but again, like that curriculum that we're doing, I think is going to help things like that. It's really about inclusive communities for everyone. We talk a lot about cultural competence, and I think that can mean diversity of all kinds. So in our work, I just took a couple quotes that I could resonate with. Psychiatry is a huge shortage. I think that's true in most states, actually. And people still have lingering, irrational beliefs that people have control over their symptoms and see them as a sign of a weak character. Too often they think my daughter's faking it. Why is the burden of proof on us? Because they seem to believe mental health is simply a fabricated behavior to get attention. We need to change the culture of belief surrounding mental health, and it starts with the language we use. This is what families say to us when they call in. They're really smart. I have a couple of resources, just thought that might help. I guess just final thoughts. I would encourage everybody to start becoming familiar with your own feelings about mental health and start to be more aware of how you respond to things. And hold yourself accountable for those feelings. And consider schools as a place to start. Starting young, you've got kids. We're looking at a long process to change, and starting in schools might be a good place to do it. They're our future. And always remember that we're all doing the best we can at any moment in time. Oh, sure. Yeah, sorry. There you go. Thank you.
Okay. So our third and final panelist is Mandy Bukowski. So Mandy is a maternal wellness and early childhood section manager at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. She provides oversight and leadership for a variety of maternal wellness and early childhood initiatives, including the Maternal and Child Health Block Grant Priority, focused on pregnancy-related depression. The overarching goal of this priority effort is to reduce stigma associated with maternal mental health throughout Colorado, to increase the number of women identified with pregnancy-related depression and anxiety who seek treatment. One of the primary activities of the priority work has been implementing a public awareness campaign. Ms. Bukowski has worked in the field of maternal health for close to 18 years. She received her bachelor's degree in nutrition, science, and dietetics from Colorado State University in 2000, and her master's degree in public health at the Colorado School of Public Health in 2015.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about what we're doing here in Colorado. I have had the exciting opportunity to build a public awareness campaign off of very small supports with our Maternal Child Health Block Grant. I think one of the things I want to emphasize for all of you is that unlike some of our other programs at the health department that might have millions of dollars for a public awareness campaign, tobacco, for example, we also have legalized marijuana in our state that provides some support for the marijuana campaigns. We started our campaign with about $40,000 in a focus group, and then got another $40,000 to launch it in a pilot for a couple months, and that led us to getting a grant from a local foundation based on the results of that pilot that gave a couple $100,000 to the campaign, and we're able to boost it and create the Spanish language piece of it. And when we started off, so many of our partners said, you can't launch it with just English, you have to have Spanish too. And in my heart, I knew that, and I also knew we had moms that needed support, and we had to start somewhere. So we started with English. So as I'm gonna share with you here in a moment, a little bit about how we learned from the women and their support systems who are most impacted by maternal mental health disorders to develop both of these campaigns, but you'll see that they were 2 years apart, and that was not a strategic move in trying to not do both at the same time. It was more of a resource piece of it. So our English-speaking focus groups we did in the summer of 2015, before we even knew if we were going to have any money for a public awareness campaign, just to start hearing from moms and their support systems, what would this look like. And we ended up with about 21 women participating in focus groups and about 19 other providers in the community who supported women to give us some feedback on what the messages should be. And you all have at least a smattering of some of the materials on the tables in front of you. You'll see the materials that have the dark blue on them are for for the support partners, support systems for a woman's life, and then the ones that are kind of more like a turquoisey light blue are for messages for the pregnant women. And we did that intentionally as well, as part of acknowledging the stigma around maternal mental health, and in particular, you bring a new baby home and everybody is saying, oh, this is such a beautiful time in your life, aren't you so happy, aren't things like, what a gift, how's the baby? And they immediately are focused on the baby, not looking at the mom. And this was apparent to us that it wasn't always going to be the pregnant mom who was going, or the postpartum mom who was going to reach out and ask for help. Oftentimes, it was the partner or the mother or the sister who would say, I just have this feeling something's not right and I don't know what to do. And so our campaign tagged both of those together. So there were support systems and pregnant women. And again, really focused on decreasing stigma and also increasing help seeking. So as you'll see, looking at a couple of the quotes here, so much of what we heard from women was people either being afraid to say anything because they thought the worst, and they thought of the cases that are often highlighted in the media that have more to do with postpartum psychosis, which is in fact quite rare, but as many of you are probably well aware, the severity of it catches the attention of media, especially if there's a death involved. But even just in addition, some of the stigma around the African American population, saying that it's just not acceptable to talk about it, or hearing from their parents, something like, well, you just need to talk, you need to talk. She's like, yeah, okay, I'm good, right? Like, we're not going there. And I think it's interesting here, we even have, an example of a nurse home visitor. So we think so much of some of our different intervention programs, and you have a nurse coming in and talking to her and saying like, yeah, but I wasn't really gonna talk to her about it. So what do we need to be doing to shift that? So our English language campaign focused on messages around saying you're not alone, don't keep those feelings bottled up, talking about the elephant in the room, trying to get at some of the ways that family or women might be thinking, what they're feeling like, and then similarly for the support systems, saying, do you know somebody? Are you seeing this? Do you know someone who might be feeling this way? How can you reach out and how can you help support them? So the bigger sheets of paper on your table are the fact sheets, have some information on the back to help give women or their support systems information about how they could talk about it and what some of those signs and symptoms were, and then tried to embed those even within each of the individual materials themselves. We also had a focus on digital platforms, so instead of having paid media on TV commercials or billboards, focused on the having them more like Facebook pages or the banners at the top of a blog post and that sort of thing, knowing that oftentimes moms would be clicking through their phones while they're holding a small baby in the middle of the night and struggling, that sort of thing. So then we did Spanish-speaking focus groups in 2017, and we really took an approach of transcreation versus translation. So we did not just copy the words and the messages and the images and do them in Spanish. We did focus groups again. We actually had 45 women participate in the Spanish focus groups, which was more than our English focus groups, which was fantastic. And a lot of what they said was, they felt tired, but they were also fearful and feeling lonely. That there was a lot of taboo around this. It was kind of dismissed as common, like that just happens to you. They really have a core value of taking care of family first, so pausing to take care of themselves wasn't really acceptable. And that fear, not only of some of the political ramifications of saying things weren't going well, but also the fear of feeling incompetent and what that would mean. So you can see some of the quotes here about what that was like. And one of the women said, it's one woman carrying another woman, and sometimes that isn't your family who is doing that. Sometimes it's just another mom in the community. So you'll see our Spanish language campaign materials look quite a bit different. They were images of women instead of kind of the animal and teddy bear look that we had for the English campaign, and a lot more around support and really getting at how do we reach out and how do we get support. It's help her, talking to her about this, it's okay. You don't have to do this work alone. There's a lot of language around the burden of it and how do we get women to not feel that burden. Some images of sisterhood. So kind of, we're in this together, we're supporting each other. Caring for yourself is caring for your family, and shifting that language, really focusing on that network. The last thing I'll say with the Spanish language campaign is we also had a Spanish language task force of providers and community members looking at the materials and the messages as we developed them to do a self-check and say, are we hitting the mark here? And I just want to point out, I also put on your tables a maternal mental health framework. I think it's important to realize, although the public awareness campaign is great, we're happy to have been able to do it, it's all within the bigger comprehensive look of maternal mental health in Colorado. And so we've just developed this framework, not just out of our public health department, but with a broad group of stakeholders to say there's a supportive community that needs to be in place first. That might look like family-friendly workplace policies, up to maximizing prevention. How do we make sure moms are getting enough sleep in those first 2 weeks? How are we making sure that we're screening and identifying needs for referral and getting them to appropriate referral? And then how do we ensure that there's a comprehensive system of care? So the public awareness campaign piece is just a single piece of how we're addressing stigma for maternal mental health in Colorado. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you to all of our panelists. Now we're going to transition into some small group discussions. So at your tables, we'd like for you to talk about a few different things. So what resonated with you from the panel discussion? What strategies would you like to use within your own work? And then are there any challenges you've experienced or anticipate encountering when focusing on destigmatization? And do you have any strategies or resources of your own that you found effective in doing your work? So we'll give you about 5-6 minutes to talk about these things. I know that's pretty quick, but then we'll come back as a larger group and discuss with each other. So, yeah. And all right, so we have about 10 minutes left, so we're gonna convene as a group to have a larger group discussion. All right, sorry to cut the small group time short, sorry. Okay. So, since it sounds like there was a lot to discuss in the small groups, is there anyone who'd like to share some of what you talked about at your tables? Some of what you discussed? Oh,
we talked a little bit about the barriers that come with destigmatization and around, for example, one of the examples I brought up was like when there's a mass shooting and the first thing you see the media say is the person had a mental health condition or they had autism. And if that's people's only exposure to that, then their social construct of what mental illness is can be really difficult, and so breaking that down can definitely be a barrier when that's, it's the media is so pervasive.
yeah. Anything else?
We just mentioned that the new, I don't know if it's new or not, but the mental health first aid initiative we think is going to be really, really important to start moving the needle on some of the mental health work in our field.
Anyone else want to share? There was a lot of discussion going on. So I know there's something else out there that can share. Oh, all the way in the back.
So our table had a really great discussion around mental health and how can we help work on that stigma piece. And we love that idea of using the cartoon in that in a fairly accessible way to most people. We're helping to get the word out. And although on first glance those can seem pretty lighthearted, they convey a pretty important message. And again, that accessibility and providing that information to other people might cause people just to think twice or question about the language or their thoughts and perspectives regarding mental health. So we thought that was a fantastic approach. The other thing that we talked about when it comes to, yes, we have the stigma challenge, but it's just like the one speaker said, mental health can be treated when it's treated well. And how can we help make that accessible to people? So if we can have those embedded mental health services to help reduce, I don't know that it helps significantly in the stigma area, but it helps make that care more accessible to families. And ideally, over time, it would impact the stigma, but if we can have those embedded mental health services in places like schools, pediatricians' offices, primary care, it just helps. It helps people, even if they are impacted by the stigma, it helps people be a little more willing to accept the help and treatment and supports that are available.
Hi, we mentioned, well, actually, I mentioned I'm a mom of a kid with special healthcare needs, and I was telling them for us moms, it's very difficult sometimes to admit that we are not right, that we are not happy. I think for moms, especially when you're having a new child, everybody's expecting for you to be so happy and so extremely happy because of your baby, and it's very difficult to admit that you're not happy. So for moms with children with special healthcare needs, they had this image that you have to be a warrior, a superhero, that you have to walk around with a cape and breathing confetti, and sometimes it's very difficult, and there's a stigma for us to admit that we are not right, that we're not happy. So I think that's part of it, having groups of discussion where you can admit that it's right not to be right, that it's right to be depressed, to be tired, because it takes a lot for us. And sometimes it's very, very difficult for us moms to admit that we are not right, that we need help.
Definitely. Thank you for bringing that up. So are there any strategies or resources that you all are working on in the work that you do that you'd like to share? Anyone? Yeah? Okay. Well, oh, someone? I didn't see you. Okay. Sure.
So I wear many hats, like almost everybody who's in here, and one of the hats I wear is I provide therapy services for families who are CPS involved. And what our organization has decided to do is to embed mental health services in an organization that provides supervised visitation for these families, in the hopes that if we can help these families work through some of those struggles, many of which are mental health, that it allows increased opportunities for those families to be successful when it comes to reunification with their children, and hopefully work to stem the generational transmission of some of the coping mechanisms that are perhaps not as healthy as would be ideal.
As a mother, I advocate all the time for mental health because, as we know, the budget cut them every year. So that's something personally that I do to help families because I'm a mother of a child who's dealt with that and is now a young adult.
Hi there. So I worked at the health department in Omaha, Nebraska, and we really wanted to create a support group for mothers. And instead of just making a support group for mothers, we created a program for kids. And we asked the parents to stay at those kid activity meetings. And then we had the moms, because moms will show up to do something great for their kids. But if I say, I need you to come here to do something for you, that's like, oh no, you can find something else to do. So we had those moms, and first we just did physical fitness, and then we talked about how are you doing, how well are you feeling right now, and that's how we got into our conversations about mental wellness and mental health, because we applauded their great parenting, and we're like, how can you take care of you so you can continue to just be happy and find joy in your own life, not just as a mother.
So we have a few minutes left, so I want to make sure there's time to ask any questions or comments, or also offer up what AMCHP can do.
When you're looking at an adult with an acquired disability, I think you have to realize that stigma really plays a big role in their own self-esteem, and that's something that has to be addressed before they can deal with the issues at hand.
Any other questions?
This is a quick question. Do you include substance use disorder in mental health, or is that a separate issue?
Most definitely addiction. There's what's called dual diagnoses, and I was just talking to this table about that, and many times they go together. I have a friend who was not diagnosed with bipolar, but he's an alcoholic. He used marijuana, he used heroin, and all along he was just trying to treat his mental illness. And so the question is, what do you treat first? And I always say treat the mental illness first, because that's the catalyst for the substance use. And once my friend got the medication that he needed, then he could work on his addiction issues. So most definitely they go hand in hand.
I'm a mom of a child who has multiple disabilities and is cognitively delayed, and we see a psychiatrist for him. But I think, especially in Kansas, in our area, our lack of providers and our lack of psychiatric beds for children, especially in long-term residential treatment facilities, is a huge issue, and that is something that needs to be addressed in this country, I think, especially for the Medicaid side and the privatization, private insurance side, because until we can address that to get the people the help that they need, they're not going to get it.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments before we wrap up? Okay. Well, let me pull up the last slide. Well, thank you all for coming to this session. I know we only really had like an hour to talk about such an important topic, but we'll be looking for ways to continue the conversation. And if you have any questions or anything in the meantime, please feel free to contact us. But thank you all, and we just have some additional resources here. A Life from Mental Health America, Life with Mental Illness Toolkit, and then from SAMHSA, Words Matter, How Language Choice Can Reduce Stigma. But yes, thank you all for coming, and please take the resources we have on the table, and thank you.